Since so many people seem to struggle writing their conclusion, I thought that what I would do this week is post a video explaining a little bit about how to write a conclusion. And since our next major writing project is going to be a personal narrative, I thought that'd be a good place to begin. But let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. I'll talk about the details of the personal narrative later. Let's talk today, right now, about writing a closing. Okay. First of all, what is a closing? A closing is an end or a conclusion to your writing. It wraps up your story, and you definitely need to make sure that you're reminding the reader of your main idea. It's your whole purpose for your project. Your closing can be written in many different ways. Okay, you could end your story by rephrasing your opening. That tends to be the most common way to do it. You can talk about your feelings or a lesson that you may have learned from your story. You could talk about hopes for the future, or you could even talk about an update if you're giving a story that happened in the past. But let's take these one at a time. First of all, rephrase your opening. That's the first way that we write our conclusions, and that's probably the most popular. What you want to do when you rephrase your opening is you want to remind the reader of your main idea, but you don't want to use it the exact same way. The way I describe this to students is it's almost like cutting and pasting what you've already done, but you don't want to say it in exactly the same way. You want to try to rephrase or to rearrange the way you describe whatever it is that you're describing. For example, if your opening said something along the lines of, "Have you ever been to the zoo? I had a blast at the zoo this weekend." You don't want to say the exact same thing back. So in your conclusion, you might say something like, "My trip to the zoo was awesome." Now, this example here says, "Don't you want to visit the zoo?" You really shouldn't talk to your reader. That's an example of informal writing, so we're going to stay a little bit away from that. But I hope you can see that there, in this example, that they have rephrased or changed the way they spoke about their opening. Another example is you could talk about your feelings. If your opening says something about a new toy that you received and you want to end, you'd say something like, "I love my new toy so much, I can't wait to keep playing with it or play with it even more." You don't want to just end your story and say, "Last, I got home and played with my toy." You need to have some sort of ending to your thought. And you can see that the top, showing your feelings, is much more effective than just a basic sentence. Okay. Next, you could talk about a lesson that you learned in your experience, or a lesson that you want a reader to take from whatever you're writing about. So you could say something along the lines of, if you talked about maybe having an accident when it was icy, you could wrap up and say something like, "Next time it snows, I'll definitely be on the lookout for slippery ice." You don't want to just finish by saying, "I went home from the hospital with a cast on my leg." You need to have some sort of finish up, and this is why we said this could be a lesson that you learn. You could end your writing with a hope for the future. If you took something away, you can say, "I hope I can go back to the pool again before the weather gets cold," or "I really hope that I get to have that experience again," or "I really hope that you learn the same lesson that I did." But in some way or shape or form, you could talk about hope. Finally, the last thing you could write about is an update. If you're telling a story that's something that's happened in the past, an update is a follow-up as to where are they now. For instance, if you wrote a story about when your baby sister was born, your conclusion can be a wrap-up about what's happening right now. You could say, "Right now my baby sister is 2 years old and she gets cuter and cuter every day." Okay? An update to whatever story you may have mentioned previously. Okay, finally, this is an example of a closing. Now, this is written a little bit primary for us, but I still thought it'd be a good example. So imagine that I told you a story, and in all of my passages, I talked about how I got a dog. Maybe I earned good grades, and my parents gave me the dog that I had been begging them for years. This is how I could wrap up my writing. I could say something along the lines of, "I couldn't believe that I had a dog of my own. I was so happy. Now, I've had my dog for 2 months, and he's a really great pet. I think he's the best pet in the world." That's an example of a closing that could be working effectively for your video. Okay? All right, if you have any questions, please let me know. Later this week, I'm going to be posting an activity that goes with your closing. Later this week, I'm going to give you an example, and you are going to write a closing paragraph. So please check on all of your details and let me know if you have any questions. Thanks, and have a great day.